Hello. Welcome back. Not that anyone, I'm so transparent that I can't not admit that I'm late. I'm 17 minutes behind my own intention of being here at 10 a.m. No one's gonna know. I have to tell myself. Go ahead and get started on Instagram. So, I hope everyone is having a great week. I am dragging this morning. I think it's between these allergies and then just kind of like doing a tad bit of the most, but we're resting a little bit more this weekend. But of course, I had to come in on another Friday and talk about how you can slowly start to challenge yourself and work towards mental health recovery, whether that be in an addiction recovery, anxiety, depression, all the things. And today we're going to talk about progress versus perfection. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm smart. I'm not going to get, but I'm repeating a lot of information that's already out there. I'm going to give you my spin on it and be able to hopefully share what my experience has been with battling internalized perfectionism and having to balance my own perspective on how do I make progress without obtaining perfection and how it relates to addiction and all that. So, but then also just to remember that this is an individualized journey for each and every one of y'all. And if you ever need any help, I'm here for consultation. If you want to work with me with coaching, I have my program put together. Especially if it's someone who you struggle through, with the relationship with food. And that is definitely a niche, but I believe that is also fundamentally at the bottom of pretty much every mental health issue we have here, is the relationship with food. It's one of the first things that when we get stressed, when we're like, oh my gosh, I got to get this project done, I got to do this thing, I got to talk to this person, is that our appetite, because our central nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system to be exact, starts to conserve energy, and our appetite and our relationship with food is the first thing to either we restrict or we overindulge on. So no, it's not a moral imposition that you are obese, or there's actually a science and a lot of different sciences behind why food and weight is an issue. So before we get started, this side, sorry, it's backwards. On Instagram, you guys have no idea what I'm pointing to. On Facebook and YouTube, these are my credentials, quote my alphabet soup, but what it means is I'm a clinical social worker and a clinical addiction specialist, and I have been working in my career for about the last actually, I have to keep updating this, the last 12 years, and that's been predominantly working with a lot of people with substance use disorder recovery, very intricate, complex PTSD cases that I've, in different settings, been able to help people build the lifestyle of recovery. And now that's just kind of what I do. I help people build the lifestyle of recovery through the relationship with food. So it's not going to be, I'm going to try to keep it short because everyone's attention spans these days, they're low, and mine included. I just have more of a kind of a conversational lecture style to my content. You guys may notice that I'm going to be a lot more intentional about getting my YouTube built up. For the last year or so, I was just kind of practicing, and my public speaking. This is public to me, especially since my life is pretty much fully virtual now since COVID. But now it's really I realize the content is very needed. The coaching is very needed. So, but it's also, wrap this into the topic, part of my story of battling perfection and progress. So I'm going to talk first and foremost about what is perfection. And so because my experiences with addiction and mental health and mental illness, I started to realize that a lot of these people, we put them in a stigmatized category of being mentally ill or crazy. And I realized that they're all suffering from very similar things: high intelligence, low emotional intelligence, and perfection. And then I started to realize that perfection, as in terms of how I integrated mindfulness and people trying to understand who they are, which really is it's a protective factor for addiction and for mental illness, is if you have a grasp on your own reality as well as your values and how your experiences have shaped you. When people know that, regardless of whether people understand it or not, people are more successful. They're more self-worthy, and ultimately we're able to unite and be able to build together, whether that be, a parent-child relationship, whether that be a business leader and an employee, is that we have the ability to interpersonally connect. And I think perfectionism is one of those things that, from a neuroscience standpoint, makes too much sense not to help people understand that it's literally just how you are built. The brain, the human being, now including genetic abnormalities, is the body is a very perfect example of, and the brain is just operates off of balance. And unfortunately, the human experience is what imbalances us and makes perfectionism very challenging for a lot of people. So when you're looking at someone who struggles with anxiety or depression and major depressive disorder, you see a lot of these internalized thought processes that are like, if I'm only just this way, I would feel better. I wouldn't be depressed if this were the situation, right? And all I really do is kind of invert that perspective to help them realize, like, what if this were already the case? Like, cultivate the feeling or make that connection for people that they're already whole, they're already perfect, which is a skill in itself, I must say. It's taken me years to refine my craft in terms of how I conversate with people to help them be more comfortable with themselves. And I will say now, my newfound platform of like my own life is that's best done in modeling your own life, being transparent, being vulnerable about my struggle. Excuse me, let me go ahead and own that one. My struggle with perfectionism, how that showed up in my life. And because it's not just one thought concept, it's a belief system. And then ultimately your belief system starts to be reinforced by the things that you think and the actions that you take and the lifestyle that you build. Okay. So my definition of like what perfectionism is, not only is a natural state of being, it's just how the brain works. It's an all or nothing. There are two different hemispheres. They have to balance each other out. But within those hemispheres, we have to understand how our experiences reinforce one part of our brain being dominant and then being able to develop the skill to be able to reinstate balance and progress. So I'm going to give you guys this. Perfection to me is an intellectual and or creative way that an individual provides themselves security to an emotional wound. Let me repeat that. Perfection is a natural state as well as an intellectual and creative way that an individual provides themselves security to an emotional wound. Why? What is that? Okay. So why I wanted to bring that is because we all have been through some shit, not gonna lie. From a societal outside looking in, there's some people, if we're gonna allow comparison to naturally happen as well, there's a lot of people who've been through some really crazy stuff and more intense things. However, comparison cannot be where we stop. We have to contrast in order to be able to compromise and find that balance between not only ourselves, but then also other people. But what I wanted to bring that conversation to be is perfection, I've noticed for a lot of people, has formed out of a way that just kind of keeps them busy. It's adaptive. It's an adaptive characteristic to feel like there is a perpetual motion. So when I was trained in school, we were trained on motivational interviewing, and I, for some reason, could just never really connect with it. And it's not that I like threw it out with the bathwater, right? But it's that I tried to expand it to make sense for someone who myself, not really knowing that I was seeing things through a perfectionistic standpoint, but considering I was nitpicking everything I did or someone else did, or I would react, I had to understand what my emotional reactions were. But then I also had to understand how those emotions were influencing my thoughts and my behavior to nitpick, to critique when not necessary, and how that was a version of perfectionism that I held myself to. And some of it was inherited. I think I definitely see it within my mom's and even my stepmother and even my father too, but unfortunately that's too far of a memory for me to really understand like his perfectionism, because if you know my story, I lost him at a young age. But I inherited some of those natural behaviors that my own mother was exhibiting in the reinforcement from her parents about being the best, right? My mom went to an Ivy League school, so there was a lot of pressure for me to have a formal education because she valued that, and I do value that education, but now as an entrepreneur, technically I didn't necessarily need it, but I'm glad I have it because it makes me just a tad bit more credible because I have a continuing universal education commitment in order to stay here to help y'all and hold my licenses, right? But what I want to get back to is that it became an intellectual reinforcement. Perfectionism became a way that my brain constantly kept me motivated. And so when we talk about how, like, why couldn't I just keep doing that? Well, it was motivated for an intellectual purpose, not a holistic wellness. So I was very intellectual heavy. I know a lot. I can study. I can pass a test. I can do this, right? But my application of that information was stunted. Procrastination was a huge issue for me. So where perfectionism started to show up would be like, oh, if I can't get it done in this period of time, then da-da-da. And so that restricted my behavior activation of time budgeting or planning, and just plotting my time and my intention. So my intention of doing something different, I was locked in to this process and this pattern of not only like it's reinforced by feeling as well as thinking, but it just becomes a habit. It becomes a behavioral pattern in terms that we can't really easily break without some degree of accountability, which you can do on your own. I completely stand by. People have a personal, like, discipline is one part of personal accountability, but perspective is really the skill that reinforces individual accountability. Is if you can be able to have that emotional detachment and be like, okay, I see myself doing this thing. I see myself reacting this way. Like in this is where mindfulness comes in, is there's a lot of different components of this, but perfection is that way that it kind of, it's scary because it's usually attached to shame. It's usually attached to a big emotion that has its roots in some depths, dark, I don't want to say just secrets, but a lot of the trendy term is like you're as sick as your secrets, but it's okay to have secrets. But if you're locking them away and not even acknowledging them, it's going to get you sick. And so perfectionism is just that way of people and your brain kind of constantly keeping you busy as a form of protection. And that's what I want people to understand about like addiction and recovery, is that you're really learning to protect yourself and prepare yourself to be able to handle stress, not completely get rid of stress. So this whole soft life, I don't want to work, is actually going to make you sicker. Make me sicker, because the brain absolutely needs to be challenged, but perfectionism is its own self-perpetuated challenge. Hope that makes sense. So one last time is my definition of like what perfection really is, hopefully to visualize it for people, is perfectionism is a natural construct of the brain, and it's an intellectual and creative way to provide an individual security to an emotional wound. So a wound, not knowing that they don't know how to manage it, they don't know how to tend to that wound, and in turn, they don't know how to maintain the care of that wound over time. So what do you do about that? Because I can't tell y'all what it is without something how to do it, right? Is that if you struggle with perfectionism, if you struggle with procrastination, because that's a byproduct of that cycle of perfectionism, consider the perspective of a timeline. Perfectionism is your desired outcome. And a lot of people think that the desired outcome is more material, and sometimes it does include material things. But perfectionism is like when you're here, right? Perfectionism from a perspective of yourself, it looks like it's supposed to happen right now. Whereas the perfectionism needs to be a timeline. It needs to be the bone that you're chasing. It needs to be something that includes the progress, because if you reach perfection, I can guarantee you're going to be bored, and then it's going to continue. That's addiction right there. So that is why I wanted to make sure we talked about like what is perfection? It's normal. It's natural to have a perfectionistic tendency. So if you're denying, now some people, I don't want to force everyone to acknowledge that they're not an internalized perfectionist. You may have grown up in a lot more stable, secure household than I did or any other person did. But if you identify with perfectionism, then more than likely it's you owning that and understanding how to zoom out from it and being able to remember that it's absolutely okay to want to look a certain way, to be a certain way, to talk a certain way. But it's going to take practice. It's going to take training, because your brain needs to be able to, if you can't get that perspective yourself, of that kind of, is this considered a, what's it called? Optical illusion, when something like looks like it's closer than it is. I don't remember. This is where like I'm a science person, but I don't really get stuck in the intellectual science aspect of it. I want to do the work. I want to help people do the work and get out of that pattern. So that's my first thing about perfection. What's my other? So at this point, which makes progress, I'd say the little steps. Now, I'd say the one thing that I think that I've noticed with people struggling with the most is the perception, the concept of perception. And I have to remind y'all, and this is, again, I can't go into every single thing about what I know and what I do in this kind of live, because honestly, it wouldn't go anywhere. And I also would be robbing myself of working individually with y'all. But what perception really is just a simple foundational concept of outside in and inside out processing. We have to understand we're naturally built to see outside. That is our protection. If we could see internally, we would be walking around and walking into walls. So perception is one's processing of information from the outside in. And then what the lacking part, and where mental health comes in, is helping people realize the inside and out again. So there has to be a reciprocity. And a lot of this culture that we live in right now, because I'm 35 years old, I'm technically an 80s baby and a millennial. I did not bring my water. That's going to potentially mess me up. We are living in this digital technology age where I even succumb to doom scrolling. I got a screen timer. Part of the reason I was late was because I was trying to turn my screen timer off, because I go live on Instagram, and I set a 2-hour limit a day to hold myself a little bit more accountable to going to bed at an earlier time. And it is okay if that happens, but you have to be able to get yourself out. My point being is perception is we are exposed to more outside in information at greater rates and volumes due to social media, due to the news, not even just the stressful aspect of the news, but if you were someone who watches TV more often, you're going to have a backlog of inside out reciprocity of information. The information that you take in, you in turn have to do something with. Your brain has to categorize it. It has to organize it, right? So if you're not doing that process of organization intentionally, that's where the toxicity starts to come in. That's where your anxiety gets out of control. That's where the depression starts to seep in. Now, some of depression is not fully just internal imbalance. It is external. But there are a lot of protective factors that people need to understand how to get into their lifestyle. And a lot of it's timing. It's a lot of things that people know, but they do at the wrong time, because we're constantly being pulled to the outside in version. Every time I go out and I leave my house, even to the gym, I'm processing new information. Even in my house, I'm still processing new information. So if I'm not careful about if that information is connecting with internalized experiences, that's where issues start to arise. That's where attachment, so if you come through this with an attachment theory lens, where the attachment styles, when we're triggered emotionally, if we've not learned and have an operating system of understanding of our own emotions, then those triggers kind of group in with all the other emotional experiences in that category. and you get stuck. You fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, or fold. And the issue sometimes is being able to, sometimes it's just expressing yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to tell someone. That sometimes talking to a therapist can help, but sometimes it is actual application. Sometimes it's action towards, be like, you know what, I'm having an anxious moment, and I'm going to go stand outside and feel fresh air. That's an action. It doesn't mean that you have to express yourself to the person who pissed you off. It just means that you have to give your brain a different perception of the information that is triggering the processing disorder. Okay, so how you fold that back into perfection is that if you have the internalized nature of your brain being perfection, if you're in this healing state, then there is a natural expectation that we already have to get it right, and it needs to look exactly like what we feel. We need to, that's where a lot of people get stuck in the all or nothing concept of revenge. Unfortunately, that is a emotional experience that you're now trying to get someone else to experience with you, versus being able to be like, you know what, you hurt me and I'm going to choose not to hurt you. It's hard, I'm not gonna lie. There are some, look, I think there's a lot of different perceptions of me when, people, I've been stereotyped my whole life, and I have a peaceful demeanor, but you would be surprised at how petty I can be too. Like, this is a skill and a craft, an intentional creation of who I want to be, because who I was up until, has nothing to do with age, but who I was up until 25, I didn't feel like I had control over my emotions. I didn't feel like I had the ability to choose. And to be honest with you, I wasn't. I was just reacting. I was not responding. So when you talk about, okay, how do you manage this concept of perception? Well, one, you just gotta have to remember some of the information that triggers you're not in control over. You have to take the control to respond to yourself. And if it is a situation where you got someone triggering you, then you have to deal with your trigger, not the person. The perception is that the person was intentionally doing something to you, versus the trick is that you have an intentional experience you have to attend to. Doesn't mean that you don't interact with that person, but usually a better answer, until you get a handle on how to input, inside work, output, to be able to be like, I need a moment. I can tell you how many times, even in my sessions, I think for me, so coming to a personal story, as a therapist, people often tell me, they're like, oh my gosh, thank you for what you do, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, I don't really think I'm that good at what I do, but apparently, people do. But the biggest difference that I made when I was criticizing myself from the perfectionistic standpoint to how I made progress into being better at what I do, and I know I'm good at what I do now, and I believe that, is I just verbalized the process. I talked to myself. So whenever no one's around, I talk myself through it. In my client sessions, I tell my clients, this is a little bit of bias of my own personal experience right now, because I'm not perfect. Like, a lot of people, not everyone, I don't think everyone thinks that therapists are perfect by any means, but they think that we're supposed to, either give advice, which can happen, but we're also trained to be completely neutral and objective. And that, to me, was a very rigid expectation from a professional standpoint. So how I bridged the gap and found something that helped me become more authentic in my craft was I just said, I was like, ooh, I'm not really sure I know what to say here. I just or be like, it happened the other day, is that someone was going through something that I was like, you know what? This person's teaching me something right now. Like, I just went ahead and tell them. I said, look, girl, I know you completely doubt this experience, but I'm watching your life. I'm like, dang, there are really good people out there. And that right there can change a person's perception of what they experience inside. But my point being is that it changed mine. It got me out of like, oh, what's the right thing to say? And let me help them practice mindfulness breathwork techniques and da-da-da-da, right? I had all this information from my formal training, from my experiences, and I have to say something. So really what changed my craft in terms of the therapeutic craft, The new craft of modeling is also a different challenge, and that's going to be my next story. But my craft of like conversation, because most people are like, oh, you're an extrovert. No, I'm an introvert. I live by myself. I stay single quite often because I need some private time, but I am social. I had to learn to communicate with people. If you ask my friends, they're like, I was the quiet girl in school, and I still, for the most part, am pretty quiet outside of this moment. But it's because I had so much internalized experiences that I didn't know how to express. I didn't know how to talk about. I had emotional experiences that kept me stuck in this cycle of like, don't say it, because it doesn't matter if people don't believe it or if it's not true. It's that I never honored it. I never stopped and took the time to really get to know me until this version. So my last point is how this new version of me is not, it looks different, but it's not different. And this is the next kind of like actionable for how you get out of a perfectionistic spiral, is you have to see the value in everything that you do. You have to, so identify some of your core values. For me, I hadn't attained some of those values when I first started this process, but I wanted them to be my values, like mindfulness, like confidence. I had a degree of confidence when I was bigger because you have to. I had to fake it. But I didn't have the degree of confidence that I built for myself now. And every step I took a risk, but I made sure it was intentionally aligned with my values. And so for example, so I'll take this new version of modeling. And modeling hits on not only being a role model for mental health, so it gives me a community, it gives me a platform and a space. It's also a hobby. It's creative for me. I get to wear different clothes. I get to have fun. It's a hobby, but it's also something that I also realize, like, people need to see growth. They need to see recovery in different ways. But modeling is all about mindfulness for me. Mindfulness not only being the emotional detachment aspect, because I do have to stay out of my head and get into my body, but it is about alignment. It is about the challenge. Like, I have got the movement of like my workout routine. Mind you, like, I'm fine. I love having muscles, right? That is there, but the alignment of presence is still something that I have to learn. And if we're talking about like this, a lot of the modeling community, I can sense the imposition of perfectionism in a lot of the women, and sometimes even the men, that I have come across, because they haven't quite understood or had the experience quite yet of how to break out of that natural pattern that their brain just does, that actually helps keep them safe, and in a way. And perfectionism can absolutely, that is going to be a little, I don't mean graphically kill a person, but it will keep you stuck for so long that it can really deteriorate your belief system in yourself. But when I watch the degree of perfectionism and I see people getting stuck with that, I also see them naturally looking at other people and being like, oh, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And every practice, every show I go to, every coaching, the lab that I go to, there's an accountability that I don't have to give myself, because I worked on my self accountability for so long where I kind of plateaued. And I have to be humbled with progress over perfection every single time. Now, you guys can look at that and see it as something different, and that's absolutely fine. But what I see in myself, I still look at some of the videos I post and I'm like, oh, my lip did a thing there, or my eye, one of my eyelids is more thick. I don't know how to describe it, but it's not quite symmetrical, right? I still see those things. The difference is I don't have an attachment to them anymore. And those are just different ways how, like, nothing's really gone. Like, my depression can still come back. Seasons change. If I don't take care of myself and clean out the internal stuff, all of that can mount up again. But every time I see myself do something that I don't want to do. I'm like, yesterday I was really tired. I was like, dang, I don't really want to drive all the way to Raleigh and go to this lab, even though I got the time. I'm like, but you're going to do it, Sarah, because you have more coming to you. You need to show up for you. And I get there and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm glad I came. Right? Is every single time I see myself show up, and sometimes in places that I don't want to be, or sometimes dealing with things that I don't want to deal with, and I handle them as best as I can. I don't challenge perfectionism. Well, it naturally gets challenged, right? But I can refocus on progress. I'm like, wow, okay. I'm not really happy with that picture, but I can accept myself for where this picture happened in my timeline. And the more that I did that, the more that I've become confident, the more that I've become grounded in my own reality and who I am in the authenticity. It's a developmental process. So I got to cut myself off there because I can ramble, and I really, I've gotten some confirmation. So thank you, Shelly, for saying I'm dropping gems, and hopefully this will help you guys just remember how to conceptualize that natural perfectionistic and protection that your brain and your body are creating for you. And to be able to remember that one small step of like not reacting to it is progress, is rebalancing the perfectionistic cycle and pattern that just naturally gets reinforced by external exposure to all of these really immediate gratifying perceptions of success or of outcomes that you don't see the story behind. So I really try to keep my brand rooted in my value of transparency and vulnerability, because it's not about what skincare product I use. Y'all would be surprised if you go watch my other video on vanity and mental health, and I'll tell you again right now, I use a little small loofah and some Dial soap to wash my face, and a collagen lotion. I did Botox a couple years ago, but there's a lot of research that it's a story for another time, but it actually affects how your brain processes empathy. And it wasn't for me. It put me in a position in life that I didn't like that version of me. My forehead was tight, but guess what? Gua sha works too. Muscle training works too. So it's really, taking the time to understand yourself is what makes beautiful people. So if you're one of those people, you're like, oh, I'm not classically beautiful, that's okay. Beautiful, it's not going to be as cliche as beautiful is in the eye but the beholder, but it is. But you are the beholder. You have to accept yourself every single step of the way, for the failures, for the imperfections, in order to build a mentally resilient version of yourself. Okay. Let me see if there's any questions. Perfection. Yeah, well, welcome to delusional land, because we all, I think I work with a lot of people, and I challenge stigmas every day of like what mental illness is. And I'd say schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder is a common thing that people, they're like, oh, I don't want to be schizophrenic. And like, you're not talking to yourself is the least of your worries being schizophrenic. It's understanding and owning that your reality is your delusion to create. But unfortunately, our narrative in society right now is still rooted on like, if someone doesn't understand you, you're delusional. And I'm here to teach you the skills to help people realize that the delusion is that you guys can coexist, or that you don't coexist together in that moment. That's what creates schizophrenic diagnosis, is a belief system that your belief does not matter. That's a whole other soapbox that I don't want to get on. Seasonal depression is a real thing. It absolutely is a real thing. Pretty preventable, not fully preventable, but pretty preventable. So I could probably do another talk on seasonal depression, probably around the time in maybe a month or so, because I encourage people, seasonal depression really needs to start not when the time changes, it needs to start at the end of summer. And it sometimes at this point, given that we all work often inside, and we're struggling with that, seasonal depression disorder, a lot of it is very preventable. But then there's also some other, if you have like a very kind of, depth of distorted belief system of yourself, it will be resistant at first. But guess what? I like a challenge. So if you come work with me, I'm pretty sure I can get you to the point where seasonal depression is not something that you have to struggle with as bad. Same thing with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. A lot of these chronic and autoimmune issues are linked with a lot of emotional repression. So I really just try to help people slowly re-engage with their emotions and with their bodies to be able to get into more a preventative lifestyle. Immune health, gut health, all that jazz. So, all right, I'm gonna cut it there. Any more questions, you guys can leave in the comments. I will come back. If you can, please go to my YouTube channel and like and subscribe. So that way the money that and the sponsorship that I get off the YouTube helps people and scholarships for working with me to help deal with mental health and substance recovery, but also just addiction recovery, whether that be a substance or a process addiction, which is gambling, sex, food, other behavioral processes that happen naturally in life that you have to learn to live with. So hope you guys have a great weekend. I will be back next week, Friday, talking about something else. Have a great day.